Think about the last time you told yourself that tomorrow would be different. You were going to wake up early, start working without delay, eat better, stop scrolling, finally follow through. And maybe for a day, sometimes two, it actually worked. The motivation felt real. It had weight to it. But then something happened. Not a dramatic failure, not a catastrophic event, just a slow fade. The same patterns returned, the same excuses, the same gap between who you said you wanted to be and what you actually did. And without realizing it, you quietly concluded the same thing millions of people conclude every time this cycle repeats: that you simply lack the willpower, that you are somehow built differently from people who seem to follow through. That conclusion feels personal. It feels like a truth about your character. But it is not a truth. It is a misdiagnosis. And understanding why that misdiagnosis happens is the first step towards something that actually changes behavior at a level motivation never can. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings are biological events. When you feel motivated, what is actually happening inside your brain is a temporary spike in dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for anticipation, drive, and goal-directed behavior. Dopamine does not reward you for doing something. It rewards you for expecting a positive outcome. That distinction matters enormously because it means the energy you feel when you are motivated is not actually connected to the work itself. It is connected to the imagined version of completing the work, the mental image of the result, the fantasy of the changed life. And because dopamine is tied to anticipation rather than execution, it naturally declines the moment the actual effort begins, the moment the real friction shows up, the uncomfortable silence of concentration, the slow pace of genuine progress, the ambiguity of not knowing whether you are doing it right. The dopamine retreats, and with it goes the feeling of motivation. This is not a personal weakness. This is neurobiology operating exactly as it was designed to operate. The human brain evolved in an environment where immediate rewards were the only rewards that mattered. If your ancient ancestor waited for long-term motivation to hunt, they would starve. The brain learned to prioritize what felt rewarding now and deprioritize what required sustained effort with uncertain outcomes. That survival wiring has not been updated for modern life. In a world of instant entertainment, same-day delivery, and infinite digital stimulation, your brain is constantly receiving signals that immediate reward is available at every moment. Every notification, every scroll, every short-form video your brain processes is a small dopamine delivery. And over time, this repeated pattern of instant reward actually recalibrates your brain's baseline expectation for how quickly and easily stimulation should arrive. When genuine work, which is slow and uncertain and cognitively demanding, competes against that recalibrated expectation, it loses almost every time. Not because you are weak, because your brain is doing exactly what overstimulated brains are conditioned to do. Here's where the problem deepens. Most people's response to this pattern is to try harder next time, to set a stronger intention, create a more rigid schedule, find a more inspiring goal, watch a motivational video, read a productivity article. And for a brief window, the novelty of that new approach generates another dopamine spike, which temporarily feels like renewed motivation. But the underlying mechanism has not changed. The brain has not been rewired. The same friction will return, the same dopamine drop will happen, and the same behavioral collapse will follow. This is the motivation trap. People keep trying to solve a structural problem with an emotional solution. Motivation is not the engine. It is the spark. And sparks do not sustain combustion without the right fuel and the right structure underneath them. What actually sustains behavior over time is not how motivated you feel. It is how you define yourself. And this is where psychology reveals something that most productivity content completely ignores. Behavior is not primarily driven by goals. Behavior is driven by identity. Your brain is constantly running a background process that asks a single question in every situation. What would someone like me do here? Not consciously, not dramatically. Quietly, automatically, below the level of deliberate thought. And the answer to that question is determined entirely by what you believe about who you are. If you believe, even implicitly, that you are someone who struggles with discipline, your brain will consistently generate behavior that aligns with that belief. Not because you want to fail, because your nervous system is trying to maintain coherence between your internal self-concept and your external actions. Psychologists call this self-consistency, and it operates with extraordinary power because it functions beneath conscious awareness. This is why forced motivation rarely creates lasting change. When a person who internally identifies as undisciplined tries to force themselves to behave like a disciplined person, there is a cognitive dissonance that the brain finds deeply uncomfortable. The actions do not match the identity, and the brain, in its drive toward coherence, will eventually resolve that tension by reverting to the behavior that matches the existing identity. This is not dramatic self-sabotage. It is the nervous system doing its job, maintaining the story it already believes about who you are. The actions were never the problem. The story was. The research behind this is not abstract. Studies in behavioral psychology consistently show that people are far more likely to maintain a behavior when they tie it to identity rather than outcome. When someone says, "I am trying to exercise more," they are framing exercise as an external behavior they are attempting. When someone says, "I am a person who moves their body every day," they are making it an expression of selfhood. These two statements feel almost identical on the surface, but at the level of neural processing, they are completely different. The first creates a goal the brain can abandon without threatening identity. The second creates a standard the brain will automatically try to live up to, because violating it means being inconsistent with who you are. And the brain hates identity inconsistency far more than it hates effort. Understanding this also reframes what evidence means in the process of change. Most people treat small actions as meaningless unless they produce a visible result. They exercise for 2 weeks, see minimal physical change, and interpret that as failure. They focus for a few days, feel slightly more productive, and dismiss it as not enough. But each small action is not just an action, it is a vote. Every time you do what a disciplined person does, even in a small, imperfect, quiet way, you cast a vote for a new identity. The brain collects these votes, not loudly, not consciously. But over time, repeated evidence accumulates into a revised self-concept. The internal question shifts from, "Am I capable of this?" to, "This is what I do." That shift does not happen through motivation. It happens through accumulated behavioral evidence that gradually rewrites the story the brain tells about itself. But there is an important nuance here that most discussions of identity change skip entirely. You cannot simply decide to have a new identity and expect the brain to accept it. That kind of forced affirmation without behavioral evidence actually backfires. When your actions and your declared identity are misaligned, the brain registers the gap and produces psychological friction, sometimes called cognitive dissonance, that can manifest as anxiety, avoidance, or even shame. Telling yourself you are disciplined when your behavior consistently contradicts that does not rebuild identity. It creates internal noise. The starting point is not declaration. It is observation. Asking yourself which behaviors, even tiny ones, already align with the person you want to become. And then treating those behaviors as meaningful identity data rather than insignificant moments. The environment around you also plays a far larger role in identity formation than most people acknowledge. Your brain is deeply sensitive to context. The space you work in, the people you are around, the apps on your phone, the rhythm of your daily environment. All of these send constant signals to your nervous system about what kind of person this situation calls for. Research in environmental psychology shows that context often triggers behavior more reliably than intention does. When your environment is designed for distraction, even a motivated, intentional person will drift toward distraction because the neural pathways associated with that environment are well-worn and automatic. Changing your environment is not a productivity hack. It is an identity signal. It tells your brain, this is the kind of place where a certain kind of person shows up. This also helps explain why so many people perform dramatically differently in different environments. A person who cannot focus at home can focus at a library, not because the library has magical properties, but because it carries a different identity signal. The brain reads the environment and makes an automatic inference about what behavior belongs there. This is why designing your physical and digital environment matters in a way that no amount of motivational self-talk can replicate. Motivation asks your conscious mind to override your automatic responses. Environmental design changes what the automatic response is in the first place. These are fundamentally different interventions, and one of them works with the brain's architecture instead of against it. There is another psychological layer worth understanding here, which is how attention scarcity affects identity formation. In a state of chronic mental fatigue, which is the default state for most adults navigating modern digital life, the brain has very little bandwidth for deliberate self-reflection. When you are overstimulated and attention depleted, your behavior defaults almost entirely to whatever your lowest resistance neural pathway is. Whatever your identity already is, your habits already support, your environment already triggers. This is why mental rest is not a luxury. It is a prerequisite for identity-level change. Without cognitive space, the brain simply cannot process the kind of slow, deliberate narrative reconstruction that building a new identity requires. Burnout does not just exhaust your body. It locks your self-concept in place by eliminating the mental space needed to question and revise it. This is the part that no motivational content wants to tell you, because it is slower and quieter and less satisfying than a bold declaration of change. Real behavioral transformation does not begin with a decision to be different. It begins with a gradual accumulation of small, coherent actions that slowly shift what you believe about yourself. It requires observing your behavior with curiosity rather than judgment. It requires designing your environment to reduce friction for the identity you are building. It requires protecting your cognitive resources so that your brain has the bandwidth to actually process who you are becoming. And it requires patience with a process that does not feel dramatic from the inside, even when it is genuinely working. The reason motivation fails you is not that you are broken. It is that motivation was never designed to carry the weight people place on it. It is a temporary neurochemical state, not a sustainable operating system. Identity is the operating system. And unlike motivation, identity does not fluctuate with your mood, your sleep quality, or whether something inspired you recently. It is the stable, underlying structure that determines what your automatic behavior reaches for when the conscious effort fades. When you build an identity that is genuinely aligned with who you want to be, you stop needing to force behavior. The behavior becomes the natural output of a self-concept that has been carefully and honestly rebuilt from the inside. The shift is quiet. It does not announce itself. One day you simply notice that you chose differently, not because you felt motivated, but because it was what you do. And that is the difference between a person fighting their own nature and a person who has slowly become someone new.